Hi, my name is Daniel. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at my reading from last week. Uh, because it was kind of the week from hell, I only got through 2 items, which is not terrible, but, well, I guess I got through 3. I read some comics as well, so we have 3 items we're going to be talking about today. Um, like I said, it was a week from hell. We had multiple big storms just rip through the area, and while a lot of people I know lost power for like 4 or 5 days, we were lucky enough to keep it. Unfortunately, I was sitting up here working, and I just started hearing a plop, plop, plop sound. Look up and see our roof is leaking. So I spent a day just up on top of the roof, patching it up with some roofing tar. And, you know, once that was settled, ended up having some medical issues. And then, over the weekend, family visited. I haven't seen for 14 years, so they got priority over any of my reading. So again, 2 books, very very small ones, but they were pretty good. So we're gonna take a look at that. The first thing I read, which was for an event called GarbAugust, which, if you don't know, is a booktube reading event throughout the month of August that was created by Ollie at the channel Criminali, where we read trash and trashy literature and fiction all month long, and just sort of so, enjoy the smuttier side, the sensational side of reading, which often doesn't get a lot of love on BookTube. So um, I've been continuing reading The Island of Dr. Moreau, which I had just finished recently. Um, this is not the original book. I read that about a week ago or so. This is the novelization of the 1970s movie. Excuse me. Um, which is written by Joseph Silva. And I gave a little bit of a preview last week of what some of its flaws are, but I wanted to buckle down and push through to the end to see if this is worthwhile. And once I got it around the horrible dialogue, where characters will just say what they're doing out loud when they're alone, which is not really something that people do when they speak. That happens throughout the entire book, but it was still really fun to see how someone could take a classic story and then just do alterations. I don't know why this book was made, but it was kind of fun, and the fact that this volume has both versions just makes this like something I want to keep as my preferred version, just because we have a little bit of extra. A what if kind of, if things were a little bit different, what could it look like? So, for one of the changes is that this book, instead of taking place in 1887, it was moved forward to 1916, and I really couldn't figure out why. I have a couple of guesses. The first is they really wanted to pound the metaphor about how humans are animals, and we have this bestial side to us. My 1916 was like a couple years into World War One, I think. So it makes sense that there's one point in the book where Braddock, the main character, is talking to one of the Beast people, and he's saying how, like, we're at war right now in Europe, and people are just eager to and signing up to go, and that was like the main reason I think they probably moved it up to take place during World War One. The other thing is, one of the differences between this version of Dr. Moreau and the original is that the transformations from animals to people happens not through vivisection, which is like cutting up the animal and reassembling them into be more of a human shape. It was done through a syringe, which like modifies the chromosomes of the animals. So I'm thinking, oh, chromosomes, while they were discovered prior to 1887, maybe they wanted to like allow more time to have elapsed for this sort of research to happen, to be like a little more plausible. That's the best I got. I don't really know. Those are my 2 guesses of why they could have changed it by what, 30 years or so. But yeah, that was one of the major differences between these 2 books. Obviously, the screenplay version. It's not a screenplay, but it's a novelization of the screenplay. That version also has a lot less thought behind it. There's more action, and we'll get into that a little bit, but there's less thought. Like you don't sit there and think about the nature of man. It's like, no, we need emergency, go go go. And also they added a love interest in this version, which is interesting because there are only two humans on the island, which Braddock doesn't know. He's given a false story for his love interest, who's this woman. They said they picked up. I don't remember where, but she was like, oh, she was from a brothel, and we saved her. We take her to this island, and he falls in love with her. She and with him, but as an audience, we know that she's probably not what she appears to be. So, anyways, she's throughout the book, and like you just see them setting up like the big punch at the ending, which I won't give away, but you can probably guess. Um, so that's something that was an interesting twist. I kind of like that. I wish they had done more with it. I think if they'd fleshed out the length of this, it could have been a little bit more interesting. But in this version, Dr. Moreau is straight up a madman. Like, there's no question about it. And while this version of the Doctor isn't cutting up the animals per se to do his transformations and whatnot, he's still he's much more of a mustache twirling bad guy. You don't really get the same build of tension that you do in the original, but in the original, like Braddock was terrified that Dr. Moreau was going to turn him into an animal, and Dr. Moreau was like, no, 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 that's not what I'm interested in at all. In this one, yes, he is, and he does. Spoiler, if you haven't picked up already, there's going to be a couple spoilers in this, but Dr. Moreau does capture him because the animals, like in the original, only more so in this version, they start reverting back into their animalistic forms, but they go like wholly back into being like a quadrupedal, four-legged animals in this. So he injects Braddock with the same formula after he captures him. After Braddock keeps causing too much trouble by going where he's not supposed to go, he gets injected with the syringe of the chromosomal changing solution, and he's slowly turning into an animal. And Dr. Moreau is just sitting there taunting him, like, "Yes, just revert. You're reverting. You are struggling to stand." And Braddock is just like, "No, I remember my past. I remember this." Um, the sad thing is he doesn't really fully lose himself, which I was expecting him to do for a brief period of time before he starts reverting and being like, "Oh, what have I done?" No, he actually does stave it off, which is kind of disappointing. When you're reading this version, you kind of want a sensationalized version. So, but Dr. Moreau is a complete and utter madman, even though he's not like being as grotesque as the original Dr. Moreau. He is definitely much worse. Um, but there are like also, I don't know if it was intentionally, but there are funny moments in this, which I appreciate. Um, in both versions, spoiler, Dr. Moreau dies. Um, he gets killed in the original by some unseen beast that he created that wasn't one of the animal men. In this one, it's straight up, he's just killed by the animal men, which is a little too much what you'd expect, but they've gone into full rebellion a bit earlier in this version. But after they're trying to pout open the door and get to the main character, Braddock and his, well, he thinks his love interest, though she might be safer than we thought, he takes his Dr. Moreau's body, and okay, and wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. In the original, he's like, he goes to them because Dr. Moreau has sort of built this religious fervor around him and his commandments. He is like the one who causes pain. I can't remember the moniker he gives himself, but he basically sets himself up as a godlike figure, which makes sense. Um, in the original, he gets killed by this creature, and then to save himself, Braddock just says, he's not really dead, he's just ascended. And he utilizes that religious fervor to like control them for as long as he can by instilling them with fear, which is probably a little bit of commentary on religion. Um, but in this version, this modified version, he goes one step further because the animals themselves killed him. So he has to be like, oh no, no, he's still alive and he can't be killed. But he does it in the dumbest way possible. He takes his body and like strings him up like a marionette with ropes and pulleys, and then just starts having him talk. And no one believes it for like a second, well maybe a second, but like they just approach and like start sniffing him. Like, no, he's dead. And they light him on fire and stuff. It was really amusing to me. I don't know if it's meant to be, or if it was meant to be like a serious moment. I haven't seen the film that this is based on, but overall, I enjoyed it. It's not well written. There's still a lot of like theatrical tricks of like, well, there's no one for me to talk to, so I'm just gonna say what I'm thinking out loud, even though you don't have to. It's a book. Like you could have made the book a little bit better, but again maybe Joseph Silva had like some restrictions put on him for this novelization, though. Yeah, I don't know. So I enjoyed it. It wasn't good. Second thing I read, let me just pull it up here because it was an audiobook. That is, come on, don't do this to me. We've rehearsed this. It's My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This is the third Grady Hendrix book that I have read this year. He's a new to me author, so I'm just going through some of his more popular books. The first thing I read earlier this year was Horror Store, which I thought was okay, but like it didn't blow me away or anything. Then I read How to Sell a Haunted House while I was in the hospital this year earlier, and I really enjoyed that. That was good, but this one by far is my favorite so far of his. This is about a girl who gets possessed by a demon. We think. I mean, early on, it's not entirely clear that it could be like the effects of LSD, but come on, it's a demon. So anyway, she gets possessed, and her best friend Abby is trying to like save her, but like she keeps going off the rails and doing like horrible things to all of her friends, and then just trying to sow discord. It's a lot of fun. It's nothing you haven't seen before, but in fact, I thought it was much more unoriginal when I first started reading it, because I'm like, I've seen this before. This is nothing new. And then I remembered that I had seen the movie that was based on this. So at some point, my wife was watching the movie, My Best Friend's Exorcism, and I'm like, I've seen this before. Duh. Yes, I have. Uh, Anyways, there's not much I really want to say about it, other than the fact that there's, at one point, it seems like a pretty straightforward, serious book, but there's like a tonal shift as soon as the Exorcist arrives, where it becomes like clearly more obviously absurd, which I welcome that. Like, I think that's great, but like I kind of wish like the feel permeated the entire book more. But I have no complaints. I think it's great. It's great fun if you haven't read it. It's very good for GarbAugust, or even, it's garbage, but it's really good garbage. So if you like horror anyway, it's really good garbage. So I enjoyed that a lot. I recommend it. So those were the two books I've read. The last thing I've read was, I just finished, if I can pull it up, I just finished Star Trek The Early Voyages. That is a series of comics that was put out by Marvel. I think earlier I misspoke in a previous video and I said it was DC. It's definitely a Marvel comic. Well, this is the best we're going to do here. Star Trek The Early Voyages. This was collected. It's about 17 issues long before it got canceled. It was collected in the Star Trek Omnibus Volume 2. These are the stories of Captain Pike and his crew of the Enterprise before there was Captain Kirk. It's pretty good. one thing, a couple notes on it. They're really not shy about killing off characters, which I appreciate because you don't really see that a lot in Star Trek. You saw it in like the Next Generation with Tasha Yar, um, and I don't think anyone in the original series was. And DS9, DS9, they killed off some characters. But yeah, I just appreciate that they were bold enough to do that. There was a human, which I can't remember his name, but he was like sort of built up over a couple issues as being one of the main characters, and then they kill him and to bring in Human Cult, who, if you've seen the original series, the episode The Cage, Human Cult is a new human. Is it human? Yeoman? I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. She was a newly added to the Enterprise during the course of that episode, and where she gets captured on the planet with Captain Pike, and things go on. Human Colt actually becomes kind of an important character in the comic. She starts off being like very like timid and shy because uh, they treated her like trash initially because the previous human was such a beloved person that Pike was just like berating her for no reason, be like, "I'm gonna get you transferred. I don't need any changes. You're garbage." So she finally stands up for herself and eventually becomes a important part of the comic crew. Um, it does feature Spock as Lieutenant Spock before he becomes like the first officer of the Enterprise, and overall he's done pretty well, I think. There's a couple issues of the comic where they land on a planet that's inhabited entirely by Vulcans who had split off from the main Vulcan planet before logic had taken over their lives, and they still have all these Vulcan super weapons that were outlawed and banned by the main Vulcan race, and they were trying to hijack the Enterprise and take it over so they could rejoin the galaxy, because I guess they didn't have warp capability, or lost it somehow. And then so they cause utter destruction before the issue is resolved. But that makes Spock want to purify all of his emotions, because he saw like how damaging they could be for his race in particular, because they're such their emotions are fiery. They're way stronger than human emotions, which is why they um, adopted logic. So like there's a whole thing where he's like about to do the ritual to purify his emotions that we see in Star Trek the Motion Picture. Can't think of the name off the top of my head. Um, but unfortunately, the comic gets canceled before that gets resolved, because we know in the original series he does embrace his emotional side a little bit more. He lets a lot of things slip, like when he thought Kirk was dead. He's like, Jim! It was really great moments, but then you get to like the Star Trek, the original motion picture, where he's about to take that plunge again and purify his emotions, and he's kind of just a jerk throughout the entire first movie, which is something I didn't like when I originally watched it. All the characters in that movie were a little bit off. So anyway, uh, Human Colt, was that her name? Yeah, Human Cult becomes a important character in this comic, and she there's one instance where she gets sent into the future, where she just disappears from her timeline and then goes into the future a few decades, and that's a really interesting storyline that happened in this comic, because of her disappearance, we discover that Captain Pike is still alive and in enjoying being the captain of the Enterprise. So in the original series, in an episode that references the cage, we find out he gets like all burnt and scarred, and he's unable to talk or move. That didn't happen because of the timeline changing. However, Captain Kirk, or rather Kirk, because in this future timeline he does not become a captain. I guess he was brought in as the new yeoman to replace her after she disappeared, and he was treated much the same way. So this must be like a character flaw of Captain Pike and crew, where they will just treat any new crewmen replacing some lost or deceased crewmen like garbage until they get used to them. Um, Captain Kirk becomes the new human, and we discover that he does not take it well when he's treated that way, and so he quits Starfleet altogether. So he somehow runs across Human Cult, and they get together, and he is like a pirate captain, Kirk, or he's a merchant. But when he comes across with Captain Pike again later in the issue, Pike calls him a pirate. So he's kind of becomes like this Han Solo character. And I guess his Chewbacca would be Scotty, which, I guess with the accent makes sense. Um, but the two of them go and try to reset the timeline by getting this MacGuffin that will help send her back in time. Unfortunately, the Federation is still at war with the Klingons because without a Captain Kirk, there was no Organian treaty. So they're going to this planet and they're just fighting all these Klingons to get to their MacGuffin. Kirk is very clear. He's only doing this to advance his career because he knows if things get set back right, he will have a better future. And they're all end up fighting. Pike comes in with the Enterprise, and Number One comes in on the Excelsior, I believe. And they all come to fight the Klingons to get to this artifact to send Human Cult back to her own timeline. Anyway, it's good, but it's kind of dark. It means that Captain Kirk's character, that was a little out of character, I would think, because he's in it for himself. So if things had happened differently, his inner nature apparently is wholly controlled by the events that happen around him, which I don't really like for him, because most of the other characters are kind of the same. Scotty is still Scotty. He's awesome. And Pike is just kind of more of a stickler for the rules, but he's still more or less Pike. And then we see other members of the Enterprise crew that we're familiar with, like Sulu and stuff. Anyways, they're all plowing to get to this planet to get this artifact, but they're all being slaughtered because it's a different timeline, so it doesn't matter. So it's like, after getting like no screen time whatsoever, Sulu's just at a console and it just explodes and he dies. And then Scotty dies and everyone dies. And then she gets sent back in time and it doesn't matter anymore. Everyone's fighting for a better future, which is kind of sad for Captain Pike because we know what his future is. He's going to end up being a burn victim. He's not getting a better future. He's getting the shaft. And one thing that would have made the comic a lot better is if he made that decision for himself. Like if he had discovered that that this was going to happen to him, but like overall that the universe would be a better place if she gets sent back to her own timeline. That would have been a way better if he like made that as a conscious choice. But even he in the panel says, "Oh no, we're doing this because we're hoping for a better future." That's a little tragic, but not in a great way. Unfortunately, this entire series, though I did enjoy it quite a bit, it ended on a cliffhanger. And like at the bottom, when they're saying next time, they're like, well, next time you're just going to have to guess what happens next because this is the last issue. Bye. Like, oh, that's a lousy way to end a comic. It just sounded like they were mad that it was getting canceled and they did like, well, we're not changing our plans. So anyway, you do get to see some other captains of the Enterprise, like April, come back, who's like basically made a Jellicoe figure. If you've seen The Next Generation, Captain Jellicoe is like he hates he hates everyone on the Enterprise D crew, and he is a stickler for doing things his own way, which isn't the kind-hearted way that like our crew would handle things. Basically, so Captain April is like a Jellicoe figure. He's just like kind of a jerk. But is he wrong? I don't know. We'll never know because the comic ended. But he came back towards the end of the comic as sort of a foil for Number One. So essentially, they did the Jellicoe Riker thing with Number One and Captain April. You're not going to find a whole lot of originality in the comic, but I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. So anyway, because I didn't read a whole lot for GarbAugust like I wanted to, um, I'm anticipating in September there's going to be like the slime trail of GarbAugust that's left behind. I'm just going to keep reading some of the stuff I had planned on reading because I think it's fun, and I'm just not going to stress out about like getting things done within the confines of this event, this event, this event. Um, this kind of reminds me of the recent video by Michael K. Vaughan, where he's like, I read too slow for BookTube. Well, me too. Um, I in his comments, I suggested that we do something like no events November, not thinking that, that sounds like another no nut November thing. That's not what I was going for, but yeah. Basically, I'm thinking of just like putting an event together, at least for myself, where there are no events for the month of November. I'm just gonna read. I'm not even gonna concentrate on like finishing things. I'm just gonna read what's enjoyable and be thankful for what I have read, um, rather than just worrying about I need to get this done for this so I have something to talk about. I need to get this done for this. Like I can talk about things in more detail possibly without being like this book, this book, this book, and then we're done. And next week it'll be this book, this book, this book, and then we're done. Like I'm not gonna do that. So in November I'm just gonna cool it off. I don't know if I have a fancy name for it yet because I'm not gonna do no event November now. Now that I'm thinking about it in retrospect. But when we get to that, maybe I'll write. I will put something out for that. But anyways, back to the slime trail of GarbAugust. I want to keep reading things that I haven't read yet in the month of August. I know we still have a couple days. I'm gonna try to get these done, especially because this I'm excited about, and this I said I was gonna read for a buddy read with MJ, even though she didn't like it very much. Still want to read them. And then like Tech War, it just sounds fun to me, and other books. So I'm gonna keep reading garbage, but I have another thing I want to get through in September, so we will talk about that soon. But anyway, I'm done rambling. I'm starting to belch, so that's a great time to end the video. I hope you guys have a great week. It's bound to be better than last week, so we'll hope for the best. Thank you. Bye.